our first speaker, Teresa Steele. She's an activist for women's rights, very interested in single-sex spaces. Even before her sadly, her personal experience with the NHS. She's going to tell us about fighting for same-sex care and single-sex spaces in UK hospitals. So Teresa, very welcome, and over to you.
Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I think I'm generally known for the operation cancellation. I was very fortunate with the press coverage on that. That was a private healthcare provider. But prior to that, I had been an activist since about 2017, and I became very interested in issues that were occurring or problems with the NHS. And in particular, I was very concerned about the Annex B policy. And I'll just explain briefly that the Annex B policy is it was bolted on to a general policy that had been in place for a long time that was committed to delivering same-sex spaces, and that was called the Delivering Same-Sex Accommodation Policy. It was a very good policy. But following the implementation of the Equality Act in 2010, it was decided to bolt on a provision called Annex B, which enabled people to self-identify onto wards of the opposite sex on the basis of gender. And I would hasten to add that the Annex B policy it wasn't even compliant in any way with not only the DSSA policy, but with the Equality Act itself, because it did not invoke the protected characteristic of gender reassignment. It just talks a lot about gender, and it's a self-ID policy. But for women, it's a disaster because it means that men can self-ID on the spot at whim, not having had any medical procedures, the gender recognition certificate, or anything at all. They can simply just pitch up at an NHS hospital and get onto a women's ward, and it's an outrageous policy. So I became obviously, many people in the UK are very upset about that. I started to get involved. I became very exercised by it when Baroness Nicholson gave a speech in the House of Lords, and she talked about a rape that had occurred, and one of these transvestites had got onto a woman's ward and raped a woman, and when the woman complained about it to the police interviewed people at the hospital who denied that there had been a man on that woman's ward. They denied it because he'd said he was a woman, and the investigation was delayed for several months until the police got the CCTV, and then it became obvious that it was actually a cross-dresser. So that's what's going on in the NHS. They will deny that these men who invade women's wards, they will deny that they are men. And so that was bad enough in itself. And Baroness Nicholson gave a very powerful speech. She talked about a lot of sex attacks that had taken place. And what was really alarming was the fact that she wasn't believed. She was pilloried because people just said she didn't have enough evidence that this was happening on an industrial scale. And I just couldn't believe that she was disrespected like that. And so I decided that I wanted to prove her right. So I started an investigation, and I went to the NHS and I asked them about sex attacks on wards and various NHS trusts, and they would not answer my FOIs. They gave various reasons and exclusions. And so I then decided that I'd go to the police. But that's the best way, because the police, they're not going to drop themselves in it, but they don't mind. that they probably would happily, give information about other bodies. And sure enough, the figures were shocking. And the first FOI response that I got was from a hospital in Portsmouth, and there had been about 30 rapes or sexual assaults over a 4-year period. And the period that I was interested in, it went from 2019 to 2022. So I put that on Twitter, that result, and it caused a bit of a storm. And lots of people then wanted to find out, how to do this. So that was great. We had WRM contact me, or people from WRM, and I happily shared my method because the script was quite tricky. It had to be evolved over a period of time. And I had help with that from Sally Wood, who refined the script very, very well. It was great, that people were helping out with that, because there were over 80 police constabularies, and so that was going along all right. And I'd intended to, once all the results were in, to submit the results to Baroness Nicholson so that she could then go to the Secretary of State with hard evidence of what this policy was doing. But what happened was I became ill, and so I wasn't able to complete the work, and other people completed it. And in the end, WRN had the whole set of data, and they ended up publishing it with Joe Phoenix. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to get them to share the results. I was very ill. It all happened around the time of my operation cancellation, and I wasn't able to submit that data, unfortunately, because I had written a report to Steve Barclay, who was the health secretary at the time, to assist Baroness Nicholson. But anyway, the report was published, and it was pretty damning, because it showed that there have been 6,500 sexual assaults and rapes in the NHS over a 4-year period, and that didn't include London. So that just goes to show that there's a big problem in the NHS with sex-based boundaries, because we all know that the majority of sexual assaults are committed by men. In fact, we know this. I think it's 98 or 99%. So it's not women who are doing this. So there's a real need for sex-based boundaries. And it was quite interesting because although I'd initiated this report with a view to proving Baroness Nicholson right, she wasn't lying, and my angle was in connection with Annex B, because I just wanted to see the end of Annex B. It actually turned out, when I spoke to a couple of ex-CEOs of NHS trusts, they told me that the majority of sexual assaults that are going on in hospitals are committed by staff against patients. And that was a big surprise to me, because I had assumed, although I'm ignorant, I'm not in the NHS, so I don't know much about how the NHS operates, but I had assumed that the majority of those sexual assaults would have been patient on patient. But it was, anecdotally, based on what's been happening, what I was told by people who are in the system at the top. This is, the bigger problem. Annex B is a travesty, but the bigger problem is NHS staff, attacking patients. Look, it's just, I haven't got the evidence. It's anecdotal. So that was a wake-up call.
Because some women saying that they came a little late, just to refocus your talk. you're telling us that you were an activist already following this very important issue of same-sex spaces in the NHS, and you were getting all these figures from Freedom of Information requests. And then at the same time, it was a coincidence, but then it happened that you yourself became ill. So you had to be hospitalized. So you had a first-hand experience in this very topic that you had been researching. So you were mentioning now that you were ill and you couldn't finish all the reports because you yourself, you were sick. So, and then is when you well, I read about your case at the press. Of course, I didn't know it was you. So could you please explain to the audience what happened to you, what were the circumstances, and then from that on, we will go back to the more general picture. Thank you very much.
I became ill in the summer of 2022. It came out of the blue. It was colorectal disease. I had an emergency admission in May 2022 in the NHS, and then I had a private healthcare policy. So I used that, and my consultant was based in central London, and his hospitals that he used for Healthcare America, UK. And the one that I was referred to was the Princess Grace Hospital in Marylebone. So there had been some delay scheduling my private operation because there was this particular surgeon was in demand, and the facilities that were required, they were quite extensive because they needed a robotic surgery team and an open surgery suite. So it was a double suite. So it's not that easy to get the facility. So I had to wait. So I think my operation was due, I think it was due on the 4th of October. And a week before that, I went for a pre-op assessment at Princess Grace Hospital. So that involved going in and having various, blood tests, swabbing, questions and answers, just getting you ready and getting information for in readiness for the following week. And there was also some medication that I had to have in readiness for the procedure. So it was quite late that I had this pre-op assessment. I think it was the previous Wednesday. So I was in a room, a small room, with a nurse, and somebody knocked at the door, but without waiting, opened the door. And it was quite late in the day. It was about 6:30 p.m. And I could see the profile of this person. And there's a lot of makeup and bright red lipstick. It was all very well applied. And I actually thought it was a patient that had got lost that was on their way out for the evening, because I've never seen healthcare staff with so much makeup. And then he spoke, and I realised it was a man. So there was a conversation, and then I realised that he was a nurse, and I just became very frightened and quickly, because I thought, I cannot have this person looking after me when I become immobilized after my operation, because I knew that I would be bedridden for several days, and intimate care basically would have to be supplied. And I've always had female staff at HCA hospitals, so I've never seen this before, and I was determined that he was not going to come anywhere near me. But it was quite fortunate that I knew exactly how to exclude him, and it's just such a fortunate coincidence that only about a couple of months earlier, I'd met my friend Sally Wood, and she'd gone through the CQC fundamental standards with me, which I wasn't familiar with. at length and the Healthcare Act. So I knew exactly that straight away, I knew that he'd breached, various, it was a patient dignity breach. So that was okay. But it was very unnerving. So I was very angry, and I said to the the nurse in the room, I said, that's not a woman, and I don't want him anywhere near me. And I bet I'm not the first one either. And she was terrified, this woman. And it's quite clear, it was clear to me that she was in a very difficult situation. And you just have to be so aware of people's fear. I was very aware of that. And she was too frightened to call the management down, because my normal response would have been to immediately call down a manager and deal with it that way. So I didn't do that. I went home and I wrote an email, and I made the complaint that it was a patient dignity breach under Rule 10 of the CQC Fundamental Standards. That's the CQC Fundamental Standards. And I made a demand for same-sex care following my operation. And I was perfectly fine to have a mixed-sex surgeon, and generally. But after my surgery, I didn't want anybody coming in to my room that wasn't a female without prior agreement, because I just thought they've got lax procedures, because there wasn't a lock on this door, and I don't want him coming in. And so that was what it was a very carefully written letter, because I knew how to write it. It was just a bit of luck that I knew, because I wouldn't have known 6 months earlier how to write it. I knew exactly how it should be written. And so that went off on the Thursday, and I had trouble with getting my prescription for my pre-op medication. I was in contact with staff at Princess Grace Hospital, and they were giving me the runaround, and they weren't responding properly, and I hadn't heard back, and I kept ringing, and in the end, the receptionist told me on Friday afternoon that my operation had been cancelled by the CEO, and that she'd sent me an email, which was so weird, because I've been ringing a hospital. They refused to speak to me, and I couldn't believe it. I opened my emails on the Friday night, and there was this email that said, "Oh, we do not share your beliefs, and we're cancelling your operation on Monday, and we have to protect our staff from harassment." It was absolutely outrageously. It was such a bad letter, because there were so many ways that they could have cancelled it or forced me off, but it was the worst thing you've ever read, honestly. So a terrible shock. So the next day, I wrote back actually my husband wrote the letter, because I was in a terrible state. He's a solicitor. We wrote it together, and it was a reasonable rebuttal and a plea for them to have a conversation and so on. And they no response, because the CEO had switched on her out of office email, and nobody at the hospital would speak to me, and nobody would speak to me until Monday, the day of the operation. I got another horrible email back. And the funny thing is that they were so keen to see to cancel the operation. They even forgot. They told my main surgeon, but they didn't tell the robotic team. And the robotic surgeon and his team turned up on the Monday to give me my surgery, and only to be turned away. And it was just such a waste of resources. The whole thing was incredible. But I luckily, as an activist, was in contact with people, and they told Kerry J. Keane, who was absolutely brilliant and very supportive, got in touch with me, and she notified the press. And then it just took off as such a big story that my operation had been cancelled for a lack of shared beliefs. It was like a tsunami. And then what was happening was so weird because I had so much support. I just, I'll never, I honestly, it makes me quite emotional because complete strangers came out for me. They demonstrated outside the hospital. There was a petition that attracted 17,500 signatures. And I was interviewed on GB News, and the whole thing became, it was massive. But over that week, I was getting more and more, I felt very unwell, and I thought it was psychosomatic. I had pains on the opposite side of, the original side, and I just thought this can't be real. But anyway, eventually, well, in no time actually, HCA reinstated my operation. Because the press coverage was absolutely dire. It went international. I gave it to Rip X Nutmeg, and she's fantastic. She did a very professional tweet, and excuse me, and it went out to, I think she said she had 4 million impressions. It was, Matt, what's his name, that right-wing person in America, he covered it. Matt Walsh.
Matt Walsh.
Yes, he covered it. So yes, they were put under a great deal of pressure. They reinstated my operation. And then when I had the operation, there was an emergency on the operating table because during the 3-week delay period, an abscess had appeared on my right-hand side, and they didn't know how to deal with it, so they had to proxy in a fifth surgeon by camera link, and they couldn't complete the procedure, and I ended up with a temporary stoma as a result, which I shouldn't have had. So that was a real, that was terrible. Anyway, that was purely because of the delay. And I actually could have caught sepsis at any time because it was an enormous septic mass that had developed that hadn't been there previously.
Have there been any consequences for the people that put your life in danger? Is there any way that they should be responsible, or I don't know whether it was something that was considered?
It's never going to happen again, and it's an actual lesson because what happened was I said to them, because I didn't want to go into litigation. I knew, I just thought I was sure that I had a claim. But my objective was to get policy change. And I think this is the way to deal with these cases, okay? The best way to deal with this kind of behaviour is not to get damages or, do a claim for discrimination, obviously you'd have to. The best way is to force them to change their policy so it doesn't happen to anyone else. Don't just get a remedy for yourself. Force them to change. And I knew that I was in a fantastic position to do that because the press that covered my story, they were the right-wing press, and it was the HCA clientele. It was the correct demographic. So the readers were their clients. So I had a lot of power, and a lot of people wanted to cover the story. So the first thing I did was I made my position clear that I would waive damages in exchange for a policy change. And then the next thing I did was I made HCA investigate themselves under their protocol. And then I ran subject access requests in parallel. And I forced them through that procedure. And obviously there were discrepancies between the subject access request because I had internal emails. So yes, and I had a lot of leverage. I had a meeting in their head office, and the people that I met, I can honestly say they were the chief clinical people. I'm absolutely confident that none of the people that I met would ever have done such a thing themselves. But it's one of those situations where you get a rogue team, a sort of an EDI team, was they're very powerful. I mean, they're just, these activists are too powerful. And they're basically acting on a frolic. There's no way that any sensible, although the CEO signed off on it, she'd only been in the job for 5 days. She can't have known what she was doing. But the HCA people that I met were very, very apologetic. They were absolutely horrified, and they assured me that they had a same-sex care policy. So it's okay, show me the same-sex care policy. And they pushed it across the table. And of course, it was the same gender policy. And I had to have the conversation about why it wasn't a same-sex policy and the difference between sex and gender. Said that I would mark up the policy. I asked them, I just said, I want you to make this compliant. I said, it's not Equality Act compliant because you haven't got the protected characteristic of sex in your policy. You've only got gender, and you haven't even got the PC of gender reassignment. And when you have you cite gender, what you're actually enabling is the expression of 200 plus gender identities, including things like BDSM gender expression, furry animal expression, and so on. And that's not something that should be in any healthcare setting. It's for the bedroom. But this has been facilitated in your policy, and also by failing to have sex-based rights in the policy, and by having a clause in it that says same gender intimate care. What you're saying is when somebody like me comes along and I say I don't want same gender intimate care, I want same sex intimate care, you're actually facilitating my exclusion. I said, this is what this policy actually says. And I just don't think they realised, because there's a real problem. I said, where did this policy come from? Did you buy it off the shelf? Is it an American policy? Because it's, healthcare America. I said, it's not Equality Act compliant. I said, there's a couple of things you need to know. I said, the first thing is that in the UK, we've had the Forstater case, and it is permissible for people to be able to say, I don't believe people can change sex, I'm entitled to say that. And that's not harassment. So I can say that now. You can't discriminate against people who express that view. And also, you should be allowing same-sex care requests. And you can't carry on like this. As in, I think this looks like a US policy. But anyway, it's obviously, they didn't tell me where they had got it from. And I said, the real problem, I said, I would like you to check your contract with your EDI advisor. I said, because whoever wrote this, they've landed you in a situation, and I can guarantee that when you get sued by somebody like me, they are not going to accept liability for any of the damage or the fallout, because their contract with you will be so tight that you're going to be the one that has to carry the can for this misadvice. And I said, I know it's really difficult, but you always have to take into account that people are frightened, and even people at the top, they're all under pressure. I said, but the way out of it for you is to take this policy and give it to independent counsel, instruct a barrister, and ask them to rewrite it so as to make it Equality Act compliant. And then, when you do that, there can be no recriminations because you've gone in without an agenda and you've just asked them to make it UK law compliant. And in your position, that's what I would do. But in the meantime, I'm going to mark up this policy, and I'm going to send it back to you and see how it goes. And that was fine, and I did that. And you know what? I didn't get any assistance from anybody with that, and I tried to get people to help me, and everyone fell away. But the professional people that you would have expected to assist would not. All of my support has been from grassroots people and anons. But it was okay. I mean, I'm an anorak over the Equality Act. I'm not in practice, but I'm an interested amateur. So I did the best attempts at a markup. That was fine. And I sent it back. And then they sat on it for a while, and I became skeptical that they were going to implement it, because I knew that if they implemented my markup, basically take gender out of policy, have same-sex intimate care, not same-gender intimate care, and so on, that they would probably lose their position on the Corporate Equality Index. And I don't know if anyone knows about that, but that's like the global Stonewall. And HCA had a 5-star rating. So they had there's a lot at stake for them. But then on the other hand, they had a problem with me because people kept running my story. And after they procrastinated for a while, I rang up Hayley Dixon of the Daily Telegraph, and she ran the story again. It had already been run about 4 times by the Daily Mail, and then with the Baron Nicholson's intervention with the Telegraph. And I said, oh, by the way, did you know that I got an abscess when my operation was cancelled? And she said, oh, really? And then she wrote all about it. So I think I'll be forever known as the woman in the orange dress that got an abscess, because that seems to pop up when you Google my name. But she did a great job. And that put more pressure on HCA. And in the end, they rewrote their policy completely. And they also had a chaperone policy that was same-sex orientated. And it's stuffed with safeguarding measures. And it's just the most, and it's 10 times better than anything that I could have written. It's absolutely brilliant. And that landed in my inbox. And I just can't tell you, it's the biggest achievement of my life. But anyway, and what's great about it is that HCA has got £100 million contract with the NHS in Birmingham, and they've had other contracts. And so what I'm hoping is that the NHS will be put under pressure there, because at the interface of NHS and private healthcare, there's going to be a disjuncture, isn't there? Because you've got the NHS with their gender ideology captured policy, and then you've got HCA with a really good sex-based policy. And what I would like people to do, and what I've been trying to get the other organisations to do, and there's no interest in, but I really feel that if people campaign and pushed for all private healthcare providers to have Equality Act compliant policies, and look, I don't actually like the Equality Act for various reasons, but at least it's got sex, the PC of sex in it. If all healthcare providers private healthcare providers were pressured to do what HCA has done, that's quite a lot. So people like Nuffield, Priory Healthcare, and so on. That would be really good. And I would like people to do that.